Welcome to the Get to Know Your IDA podcast presented by the Erie County Industrial Development Agency. My name is Robbie Ann McPherson. I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications for the ECIDA, and we bring you this podcast to explore the IDA role in our local communities and the community benefits that we provide, and also to illuminate exactly how things work, because it can be kind of complicated and people don't always really understand it outside of the economic development industry. And today I am thrilled to have our board chair, Miss Brenda McDuffie, here with us today. Welcome, Brenda.
It's great to be with you, and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for taking this time. We definitely plan to pick your brain about all things ECIDA Board. And let's start out with, just in case there's someone in the Western New York area living under a rock and does not know who you are, because you're kind of ubiquitous in our community, why don't you explain to us a little bit about your background and how you came to be the IDA Board Chair?
Actually, I am ubiquitous in that I have been engaged in the community for a very long time, being both an advocate as well as having the responsibility of leading two critically important organizations, the Buffalo Urban League, and prior to that, our workforce development system for the entire county.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have always participated actively to improve the quality of life for all citizens and to really make sure that we hear perspectives for the most vulnerable populations in our community, and we really afford them the opportunities to participate in our community fully.
Mm-hmm. And you've been extremely impactful as a leader of both of those organizations. And as the board chair for the Erie County Industrial Development Agency, I should give a little background on our board just for people to understand the makeup. Our board it has 14 ex officio members, which means by the virtue of their office, they are by law required to be on our board. And there are 5 members that are jointly chosen by the chair of the Erie County Legislature and the Erie County Executive. And so why don't you explain to us exactly how you found your way to be seated at the head of the table for the ECIDA Board?
So as you said, the board itself is made up of 14 individuals, and some of the individuals are represent different communities, different organizations. It's a very well-rounded, inclusive group of individuals. And so I was originally approached by County Executive Polling Cars to potentially be considered as a board member, which had to be approved by the Erie County Legislature. That happened, and I started out as a board member. I was then nominated, invited by the existing board to be part of the executive committee via being an officer. And then I was asked to potentially be considered as a board chair. And as the board chair, you are voted on by your fellow members of the board. So it's been a constant refreshing process of, in our case, every year we elect the officers of the organization, and the chair is one of the officers.
Which I think it probably indicates the confidence that the rest of the board has in you as well. I think that for all the board meetings that I know I've sat in, there's a really, really healthy discussion. There's a healthy review. There are a lot of interesting points. The way that I see, sometimes people have the incorrect assumption that it's some kind of rubber stamp or something like that. But that's really not how the approvals work in our scenario. And just for people's background, when a company approaches the IDA and fills out an application, completes that application and submits it, it becomes public, the entire document. And it first goes to our policy committee, which is chaired by our vice chair, Richard Lipsitz, who I'm hoping will come on our podcast in the future. All right. And then once the policy committee reviews it, and again, all those meetings are public. You can look them up on our website, which I'll give everybody at the end. But you can really see the sausage being made, I guess, as they say. There's a lot of discussing the merits of the project and the material terms, et cetera, much more than people just saying, okay, we have an application, let's approve it. And then the policy committee makes a recommendation, which is not binding, but they make a recommendation to the board, whether they suggest the board approves it or not. And then it lands in front of Chairwoman McDuffie. So if you would, explain a little bit about when, the board meeting starts, you call things to order, and what are you thinking and looking for when you're looking at an application and you're thinking, okay, is this going to go or is this not going to go? How does that process work for you?
So I'm going to back you up, Robbie, because when you speak of submitting an application, that is the start of the process, and the staff does a tremendous amount of due diligence with the organization, explaining not only what opportunities we have for them to receive benefits from the ECIDA, but also some of the requirements we have with receiving the tax abatements that we're authorized to provide. And so when a company understands and agrees to those, their application is formally submitted. They have to go through a public hearing process. And so it gives an opportunity for the public to give any input on a particular project. So it's always open to the public in that respect. And as you said, in addition, we have a policy committee, and that is the committee of the board that not only reviews the applications and makes a recommendation, but also looks at our policies and ensures that the application meets those policies as described in the package. So that committee is an expansion of the board, because we have individuals who are not on the board who serve on the policy committee, and they are given a chance to read their materials in advance, which is a board responsibility, so they come prepared, and read all of the associated information, which includes the transcript of the public hearing. And so we, in some projects, we get a fair amount of public information where people express views about the project, sometimes in support, sometimes not in consideration of supporting the project, or they want some changes made or some assurances. And so we're taking into consideration all of that information. When we have the policy committee, a representative or representatives of the company are invited to attend too. And so there's an opportunity for the committee to ask questions of the entity that's seeking the tax abatements as well.
And
yes,
they do.
There is a very healthy discussion, and our vice chair conducts the meetings, welcoming and encouraging the committee members to share information that they may know. It's public. That meeting is open to the public, as well as to ask questions of the company and of staff. And so there's a very healthy dialogue. And then there is usually a vote taken as to whether or not the project is going to go forward to the board with a recommendation to approve, disapprove, or no recommendation at all. And so when it gets to the board, it's been through a number of layers, all of which, as you mentioned, are open to the public. Our board meeting is open to the public. It's always available now that we're in COVID on our website. You can join the meeting, you can listen in. And certainly, if we receive any comments in between the recommendation of the committee and or staff receives any information in between, the board and the committees as appropriate are always updated. So it's a very transparent process. And we go through the applications. I try as the chair, and I feel it's a responsibility of the chair, to welcome and encourage comments, questions, issues that any member of the board wants to raise. Because when it's time to vote on the project, we want everyone to have enough information to be able to vote based upon their assessment of the project. And so we try to create an atmosphere, as you said, that people feel very comfortable asking questions, raising issues, bringing information forward. And so I think the furthest thing it is a rubber stamp. The other thing that's critically important is, as I shared with you, the policy committee does act as a major committee that brings forward policy. And in each application, we have certain policies that, frankly, the Erie County Industrial Development Agency led the entire state of New York in developing. Before there was a requirement for what's called a recapture policy, we created one. And so it's something that we can be very proud of, because what that does is it lets an entity know what standards we will require, or what are the covenants and the agreements that they're making in order to get the tax abatements that they're applying for. And let me give you an example of one of the standards.
Sure.
We want to protect the workforce, and we do, I would say, economic development as an organization. We also do community development. So we want to protect the jobs that, if we're going to give public money, i.e. through taxes that you don't have to pay, we want to ensure that you're going to continue to employ people. And we also want to know you're going to hire new people if that's something that you're proposing. And so there are standards for job retention, and there are standards for new hires during the course of the tax breaks that we may choose to award you. So that's one of the recapture provisions. We have local labor, where we expect that local labor will be used. We want you to invest the amount of money that you indicated you were investing in the project. And you'll hear about some other policies that we're developing. We want to make sure that we do a lot of a good amount of projects that don't really create a lot of employment opportunities. When an old building that's been dilapidated and not used has been really probably not providing any real value to the community, gets to be redeveloped, we have what's called an adaptive reuse policy. And because a lot of the dilapidated buildings that no longer are being used for industrial sites and other sites are vacant, that policy talks about now, if it's a housing initiative, a set aside or housing for working families. And so that was introduced as part of the policy. So what I'm really trying to say is there's no rubber stamp, there's no giveaways. We have,
Right.
as a committee and supported by our county executive, uh, a a value system that says you are getting a public asset, right? You're not paying taxes, and in return, we have an expectation that you will do those things that will support people holding their jobs, people getting new jobs. Your investment is going to be, et cetera, et cetera. All the things you agree to. So
That's such a great observation, right? I just wanted to uh, highlight what you said. It is an
mhm,
agreement. It's an agreement from the applicant, and I also wanted to point out to our listeners, Brenda, you mentioned the packet and reviewing the information.
mhm.
Listen, everybody, those packets are about 2 inches thick
Yes.
sometimes. So that's how much the board has to go through and review these applications. As you said, the transcripts for public meetings, and then consider also all of those policies. And many of those policies were implemented after you
Mhm.
joined the board. I know that the county executive has spearheaded a lot of it, and our policy chair and vice chair, Richard Lipsitz, also. But maybe as long as we're on this topic, Brenda, you could speak to why is it important to ask a business who's applying. I mean, I guess it's sort of the equivalent of soft skills when you're looking for employment. You know, these are sort of social focused policies. Why is it important to require a business to adhere to those in addition to you have to create this many jobs and you have to invest this dollar amount?
Well, it's important because, as I said earlier, there's an exchange, there's an agreement. And the agreement is that you're going to do these things because guess what? We're making an investment by giving you tax abatements as an entity. And in return, we want to protect the workforce, our labor. We have a policy around ensuring that women are paid for the same jobs what men are being paid for,
Mm-hmm.
receiving as wages and compensation. And, you know, we say there are laws, but we know every day people don't adhere to laws. And it's also in recognition of the fact that we know that if we are going to have a strong economy, we have to have opportunities available to women at various wages. And we certainly want them to be paid at equivalent. And we know that that is not the case across this country right now. Women are paid far less than men for the same occupations. But again, if we're going to give you something in this community, we're sending messages about our expectations as a community. So,
Mm-hmm.
as you ask the question, it's a expression of our value system in this community. And
What a great way to put it.
it's
Yeah.
those policies that we have. And guess what? We just don't make the policies. We give people orientation, as I said at the very beginning, of what the expectations are. We have provisions if things change where they can come back. And sometimes they're coming back actually for more tax relief
Mm-hmm.
than originally planned because they were expanding their projects. And then guess what? In COVID, we found that the cost of materials and supplies had changed. So when we gave them a tax exemption up to a certain amount because it now costs more, then they're asking or they have the ability to come back and ask for more. So all of
Mm-hmm.
these things are in consideration of what we want as a community. If we're going to grow our community, we want it to be an inclusive community. So, policies around women, policies around minority owned businesses participating, um, and where we can have housing policies. We have senior policies that we've considered. In COVID, we've created things to be in a position to be responsive to the community's needs, and it's through the board and the committee and other members of the community who serve with us, really being very conscientious of what's going on and what we're expressing as the values of the organization and of the leadership of the organization.
What really is a great way to describe it. And it also helps to address the part the IDA plays in creating quality of life for the residents of Erie County, because if you have good corporate citizens who are employers, it sort of all extrapolates and trickles down. And I might borrow that for our marketing materials about the values.
Oh, absolutely not. It's real.
That's a great
I mean, it's real, and it's what we both will benefit from. A company that's getting the incentives they need to be able to complete a project, right? To do the project, because it is savings in terms of dollars that they would otherwise have to pay out, right? Is our partner. It's important for the local economy to have businesses grow, expand, to have blighted buildings that have been vacant in our community redeveloped. It's not only the redevelopment, but also to respond to housing needs of our community. And so it's what we try to create is a win-win situation, where the benefits are accruing not only to businesses, which are critically important, but our community as a whole is realizing that benefit.
Yeah, and you touched on a great point too. The kind of flip side to the board not being a rubber stamp and taking a lot of time to review all these qualifications, making these agreements, making policy requirements. The flip side is that for a business, these incentives can make the return on investment either a green light or a red light for developing a project. And I think there is a lot of misconception out there that, just because you are a large developer and, you have X number of net worth or something like that, that it's easy to finance a $100 million project, or manufacturing, or, well, gee, this manufacturer seems to be doing okay. They can't come up with a few million to expand. No, it's borrowing, it's collateral, it's all kinds of return on investment numbers. And that is a wonderful point, that it becomes a win-win, because we have responsible policy, we have due diligence, extreme due diligence, 155 scheduled meetings every year between policy, board, and all public, it's, as you said,
and other committees.
But yes, we have a nominating committee. We have meetings about meetings
to make sure we are prepared. And that's why I said one of the responsibilities of a board member is not only to consider all the information, but to read the information. And those documents are available for the general public too, to read and to ask questions about. And I think all of those things are very important in creating that environment where people understand that the agency is here to really serve the community, and it has a very specific mission and purpose. And we're going to do that. We're going to take our responsibility very, very seriously.
Yes, agreed. And speaking of responsibility, we're almost out of time, but before we go, I wanted to see if you would share your thoughts on the agency's COVID response. You mentioned COVID a little bit earlier, And obviously, there isn't a person in our community who hasn't somehow been affected by the shutdowns and the health crisis and all kinds of things. And the agency, when COVID kind of first it started to affect our day-to-day lives back in the spring of 2020, the agency did start looking at creating some helpful programs. And we discussed those in detail with our President CEO, John Capolino, in that podcast episode. You might check that out. But from your perspective, Brenda, as board chair, what are your thoughts on how the agency responded and how we may have helped or not helped, or what do you see when someone says COVID related to ECIDA? What comes to mind?
I would say exceeded all expectations. The organization, and I have to really take my hat off to the team, the staff team, just stretched and came up with a recommendation to create a fund that would provide resources. Now, that fund actually came out of our operating reserves. So it wasn't anything that we had to do. We were given resources from the government to do some things, but we actually created a fund. And we targeted that fund to businesses in our community, small businesses, minority-owned businesses, veterans-owned businesses, the most vulnerable businesses at that time were able to apply for assistance. And I should say not only businesses, but organizations in our community that were impacted by COVID. So that was one thing that we did. And that was no easy task, because things were happening so rapidly and changing that the organization had to make sure that it could be flexible, it could be responsive. And when I say the word responsive and adaptable and flexible, I want to also say for those businesses that received the incentives from us, they were hurt too. And so their projects were delayed. And as I said earlier, sometimes the costs change. We gave them the opportunity also to come back, let us know what was happening, how they were impacted, and we made modifications as a result of it. And all of that was done in a millisecond. It happened so fast, and our community is still benefiting. In fact, we kept businesses in business. We also, we don't do things in a vacuum. So we worked with partner agencies to develop not only marketing and public relations campaigns to tell people about these opportunities and businesses and organizations, but we also work with other entities that had resources. I think people had heard of the PPE money. So we made people aware of it. Yeah. We helped them to apply. We gave them referrals, and we worked with partners in the community who were doing like things in terms of making sure we could hold on and make sure that we can have businesses that were able to continue to be operational and employed, or just hang on until some of them were closed completely, until they could reopen. And so it's around also making investments that stabilize and respond to those crises and emergencies. And we're still responding, and,
True.
Yes. The marketing campaign that was developed under the task force, the ECIDA played a critical role. You did. In creating the 716 with the county executive's effort to support businesses during this time, and to make sure particularly our restaurants and businesses got a chance to have a customer base that came from the community in which they could sell their product. So the ECIDA works in partnership with so many organizations and businesses to ensure the viability and the continued not only retention of, but potentially expansion when that time is appropriate for our business community and for individuals in this community.
Yes, and I'm so happy that a couple times in our conversation you've mentioned job retention. I think a lot of people tend to focus on creating new jobs, which is critical, but saving, retention is kind of an interesting technical word, but really it's saving
jobs. Yeah.
And and you can create 1 million new jobs, but if you lose 1 million jobs, it doesn't really help. So, the grant program that you were speaking of, that staff created out of a fund, our grants director, Lori Sussick, and at the time she was our business development officer, Beth O'Keefe, and our president CEO, John Capolino. Boy, oh boy, they really just performed.
Yeah, they hustled.
Because,
your whole team worked to get that done. And the number of applications you received, they didn't stop pouring in. And in fact, we had to authorize additional support because we wanted to be responsive, because we wanted to make the turnaround time. And as you said, these were grants. There was no expectation that there would be a payback. And so we took money that was in our operating fund that we had through good practice and stewardship had accumulated as an organization. And we said, this is the time to use that for the community's benefit.
Right. Yeah, it ended up being 105 businesses that received grant money, and the grants, it was almost $700,000 in money that went directly to each of these businesses so that they could purchase PPE equipment, because it was an unexpected expense. And for some restaurants, hair salons, small mom and pop operations, sometimes having to comply with thousands of dollars worth of PPE requirements, it as you said, with the job retention part, it might have made them shut their doors, but my hat goes off to Beth and Lori and John, and also our chief lending officer, Jerry Manhard. He and our credit analyst, Daryl Spilecki, they put together a special COVID loan program. And
that was through our RDC, the Regional Development Corporation that we have, which is the lending arm of the ECIDA.
Correct. And the RDC shares a board with the ECIDA. So you were certainly instrumental and critical to the process of getting all of those loans out the door too. They ended up, it was some $11 million or something. Just incredible speed and efficiency, which, wow, but I think that just in a general sense, I would say that COVID probably taught us two things. Number one, we saw how bad the problem really was and how many businesses really were in desperate need of help due to, all the factors associated with the pandemic. And number two, we looked around. I know for speaking for myself, working with many agencies, working with yourself on the business committee that the county executive developed, you realize, holy cow, we can work together. We as a community and all these government agencies and private nonprofits and everybody just kind of, rolled up their sleeves and sat at the table and said, okay, how do we fix this? Yeah. And it was pretty extraordinary.
It was, like you said, it was extraordinary. It also showed and captured, I use the firm Buffalo Comeback Buffalo, and then the resiliency of the community and the ability to really work together, especially under very, very challenging circumstances. because remember, you couldn't even meet in
Yes.
person. So
Right.
everything was
Right.
done with technology or through technology, and it got done. It got done. Everyone put, like you said, rolled up their sleeves and volunteered and said, I'm going to do this, or stretched in their capacity. And that's with all of us feeling the stresses of COVID and what it
Right.
had
Right.
brought to
Exactly.
bear, you know.
Yes. Everyone had a personal stake and, something in their personal lives, right? We were all dealing with something affected
Mhm.
by it. And you're so right about that. I know I was making flyers for the Small Business Development Center at Buff State. And, I am not a graphic artist. But, you sort of just, okay, I got to figure this out. Somebody's got to help and do it. I was so humbled by watching so many people just, there was no one ever said that's not my job. I never heard that from anyone. And just an incredible partnership. I was really honored to be a part of the Western New York Business Committee. That was something pretty extraordinary. Yeah. And we're not out of the woods
No,
yet.
we're still in COVID, and it continues to wreak havoc in our community. And we know that there are sectors that have been more hurt, affected in terms of really hurt by it. And we know that there's been a lot of adaptation during this time period, people finding new ways of doing business, new ways of work. Um, and we got to keep at it. We got to keep at it because we're going to win this. We're going to win this battle, and we'll have a new normal. And I don't want us to forget and take a moment to savor our victories during that time, the things that we have been able to do and overcome. And in fact, in the last, well, we haven't finished this year quite yet, we're almost there, but in the last 2 years, we've almost had record numbers of projects. And so it's also a real demonstration that we've been able to keep our economy moving, and businesses are responding in terms of, okay, I'm ready to do that project. I've adopted and adapted to the changes that COVID has caused, and I'm able to expand my company's workforce, or rehab a building and make apartments out of it, or I have to change the designs to incorporate features that will protect people during COVID, and that's going to cost a little more.
Yes.
But they have a partner. They can come back to the ECID and say, I need to modify my agreement with you. And we're receptive to that. We're here for you in the real, not just words, but we're walking the talk. We are really here for this community, and as a economic and community development agency.
Perfect. I'm going to borrow all that for our marketing materials. We are here for you in the real, not just words. That's a great way to put it. I want to thank you so much, Chair McDuffie, for joining us on this podcast. I think it's very useful for people to hear right from you and have an opportunity for maybe more than a soundbite, right? To just talk about some of these things and share them. And I want to remind people that you can visit our website, which is www.ecidany.com. We have a whole tab that lists all of the policies that Chair McDuffie mentioned, and you can literally download the whole policy, read all of them. You can find out any information about any programs. We have sunsetted the COVID PPE grant program and the loan program due to the lifting of the emergency declaration, which happened last summer. But I guess we could say we hope that we don't have to institute them. But they were definitely something that I think the staff and our board can be really proud of. It really, as you said, it was a great collaborative effort, and we certainly thank you for your leadership during that whole time. That was there was, shifting, as they say, shifting goalposts and shifting ground underneath our feet
every day. And that's what you do when you're being responsive and responsible. And so we do both and do them very well. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'm hoping this won't be the last time, because there's so much to talk about with all the things we do. So yeah, I appreciate it. We hope you'll come back.
If invited. Thank you.
Thanks. And thank you everyone for listening. We will see you next time. This has been the Get to Know Your IDA podcast from the ECIDA. Thanks.